Hey, hello, guys, and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. I'm back with another podcast. And this week I have my friend Dinah, Professor Dinah, Dr. Dinah. She is writing some books. She is explaining to us and sharing her knowledge about literary genres in the Bible. We're going to cover something really interesting. Before you continue, please share this with other people on Facebook and every outlet and platform that you have. Also, don't forget to hit the bell, subscribe, and hit a thumbs up and share with other people so we can continue to share this message with others. Remember, we also have, if you still want to, you living in Florida or anywhere near Florida this weekend, next week, I'm sorry, we're going to have our temple course 108. Joe and I are going to be teaching, and I think it's going to be quite interesting what we're going to be covering there. And I'm looking forward to exchanging and learning about more about the temple and the function of blood and blood manipulation and what does that mean in regards to our faith in the Messiah Yeshua. Remember also to subscribe to wisdomintorah.com. I have a yeshiva section, a school section there. I have all my courses from Ancient Near East and also all the temple courses. So I think you'll be blessed. So I want to welcome Dinah. How are you, Dinah?
I'm good.
Yeah, I want to make sure you get your um,
My
video
video is not
back up.
working.
Yeah, it is. Just go.
Okay,
Yeah, it'll come back on. There it
there we
is.
go. All right.
Ah,
Hi,
how are you?
everybody. I am here. I'm good. I have to say, so we had another storm on Sunday. We got another 8 to 10 inches after the 20 inches we got 2 weeks before. And
Wow.
today it's 75.
Hey, it's only like 80 here in Florida, just so you know. No
Hey, we're
rain.
only 5 degrees less.
Hey.
So I'm jazzed because it's a beautiful day and the spring has sprung and my blossoms are blooming and smelling wonderful. Yes, it's great.
So, okay, so let's get into this because I think it's
Yep.
quite interesting. You wanted to cover more about the Exodus story. As we know, we were talking about this before we came on live. We were talking about that in the Bible, there's only one story. It starts from the book of Genesis and it ends in the book of Revelation. Everything in between is a retelling of the same story, how God is going to release us from death. Do you think that the religious world have made the message a lot more difficult than really what the Bible is trying to describe?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about probably 2 sessions ago, is once you've formulated the Bible into theological boxes, you're stuck in the box. And
Yeah.
then you don't see the thread of the story because you've got this box for salvation and this box for eschatology and this box for redemption and this box for forgiveness. And so I think you miss the whole story.
I would agree. I
Yeah.
was mentioning to you my research that I'm doing on the book of Leviticus. I've actually, I've been studying, I've been studying different areas, trying to understand the whole panoramic picture. And to be honest with you, literary genres was not something of interest until I began to study New Testament cultural backgrounds, that I was forced to look into the way Paul was writing his letters and the audience that was receiving the message. And one of the things that I've noticed is that although we keep using and talking about Yeshua as an offering, and the way we present him in the context of Leviticus and the temple, yet those areas are completely misunderstood or hardly even studied. I think the same thing can we say is true about the main underlying message in the Bible, how God is trying to deliver us from the only thing that the temple can have no solution for. The Torah has no solution for death. It can do many things, but only God can render someone innocent or justify that person to be free from that particular, situation, which is death. And I
Yeah.
think we're missing that. I think the way we're presenting the information, especially you, may give some people an insight into more clarifying the underlying theme, I think, in the Bible.
Yeah. So I think before we go into all that, because we're looking at literary tools and devices, and I decided that this week we would tackle the genres. And so this particular week we're going to talk about narrative. So let's maybe do that first, because the story is the key. Once you understand the story, all the little pieces will start to fall into place, and then they don't become units all on their own. Now, it's not that you can't study them, I'm not saying that, but we've lost, and I've talked about this, we've lost the 50,000 foot view. So the narrative or the storytelling really is the main dominant genre in Scripture, and it's the easiest to embrace. So God uses storytelling just like man uses storytelling to speak about relationship. And if you think about it, I would submit the greatest, easiest story to engage in is the Exodus. And in many ways, the Exodus is just a repeat or replay 2.0 of the Genesis story. And then, of course, in Genesis, you have all those stories. But
Yeah.
whenever you have narrative, you have characters, you have plot, you have a setting, and the plot usually features some kind of conflict, and then you have some kind of hero that, flies in and takes care of the conflict, some sort of resolution there. And so if you can, yeah, it's just easy to engage, say, Exodus 1 through 19 or most of Genesis, right, in
Yeah.
this storytelling thing to unlock what's going on. I would say that storytelling is really the oldest form of communication that we have. And
Yeah.
the biblical writers clearly use that in the Bible.
Let me ask you something, because I caught on to this. Sometimes we've been accused of, I think more you than me, but also myself, that we use biblical genres, literary genres, as metaphors and similes and all the stuff that are there. And I remember reading the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of the ancient epics, and I'm thinking, I came to the conclusion, I'm saying, wait a minute, we're trying to be so focused on be concretely accurate on everything, which I believe all those things did happen. I believe the
Sure.
flood happened. I believe all these things did happen. But then I'm talking to somebody, it was actually my jiu-jitsu class. We were talking about some of that he did not believe some of the story Bibles, and the Bibles were true. And it occurred to me, I'm thinking, I told him, I said, okay, so let's just say for 1 second that the story that you see, the narrative that you see, is not literally true. What's the message behind it? And it was really interesting. He looked at me, he goes, I didn't think about that. And sometimes we are missing that
Yeah,
end
I
of the
agree.
narrative. There's a message behind it. Let me give you an example, and then I'll cut you loose, do whatever, because I know you have a lot to talk about this. We have water in Genesis 1. We have water in Genesis 6. We have water in in the book of Exodus 14. We have water again in the book of Joshua, crossing through a body of water. We have Jonah going into the water. The Psalms using that literary genre to talk about chaos and order and life and salvation. And we still don't get it that Yeshua walked on water, and we assume about the miracle of the supernatural, and we missed the message that he's bringing.
Yeah, water, water everywhere, but not a
Yeah.
drop to drink. Yeah, yeah, and that is sort of foundational to the Bible. And as you mentioned, the sort of order chaos story. I mean, this will take us in a whole different direction, but it's important. I would just say the point of the stories has multiple applications here. So one reason that they passed on their stories orally was that's the way they passed on wisdom from one generation to another and their cultural experience. They did it through stories. So if we have any hope of understanding the cultural experience of the ancient Near East world, we've got to go back and look at these stories and try to see it from
Right.
their point of view. And then we can make application. And it's just like what you said. If you don't understand the water thing, the chaos waters, the seas, the raging rivers, and all that, and the message of chaos and disorder, and then the creational element of that, of new life coming forth out of water as Israel went through the sea like a birth canal, Yeshua walking on water, having sovereignty over it. If you don't understand the stories, the ancient stories about water, then this doesn't make sense. And again, we're not trying to replace this, but we have to recognize that we have an ancient Near East view of a world and we have a modern view, and they don't actually work together all that well. And so if we can understand that, we keep approaching it from a scientific point of view and try to step out of that and look at it back culturally. So these stories, they pass down cultural experiences. They build their communities, build up their communities through these storytelling. They build up their identity through storytelling. They help the next generation process the human experience. And really, isn't that what the whole Bible is about? Is like, Who are we? Why are we here? You know, what is God doing in it? It's about a human experience that we all have gone through and trying to make sense of it.
Right.
And as the stories are being told, they create emotion and connection and excitement and provide a way for a common understanding. And I think too, if you think about listening to a story, then you create your own imagination in it. Like you give the characters a picture and where they're located. Like it's much more imaginative and creative
Right.
hear a story than it is, just to go out and describe something
Well,
specifically scientifically, if you will.
isn't that that's exactly what Judaism has done with their midrash?
Yes, exactly.
Midrash is basically expounding on the narrative so that the audience can have more of a fuller picture. I don't necessarily agree with their conclusions, but it's
Sure.
interesting that what you're mentioning is the core of the Midrash, is trying to get a better grasp of what the narrative is about, really.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think the problem, what is the core problem within, let's not talk about Christianity because and there are many things that they're doing right, they're doing wrong, whatever it is. We're doing a lot of things wrong anyway. We're
Yeah.
learning.
Really.
But, they're removed a little bit from a lot of this understanding because they're looking at it from denominationalism.
Yeah.
But we're finding to be true the same case on our side. I mean,
Yes.
we still have so many people that if you mention one little thing, they go crazy, they cut you off, they don't even talk to you anymore. I mean, that's crazy. And you
Yeah.
would think it's like when we talk about ancient Near East. People for a while saying that's all you think about ancient Near East. Well, how in the world am I going to be able to understand who Moses was from whose perspective? The Christian perspective, they think he was some old guy from the Old Testament, and the Jews' perspective, who look at it from Middle Ages Judaism and their interpretation. I want to move closer to the time frame when he lived. And I think the same is true to all of these stories that we read in the Bible. We have to go back to that time frame. So
We
tell us
have to.
more about the Exodus and all the narrative that goes on there, and give us some more insight into that as we continue to dialogue on it.
Okay. Apparently, you think we have about 17 hours to
I
go.
know, but we only have another 45 minutes, so you still
Well,
got
I would
plenty.
just say, so the Exodus is sort of the grand narrative of the Bible. We might call it an epic, like in the Iliad, Homer's.
The real epic, right?
Yeah, the epic of epics. And it has all the elements in it, the hero, Moses, the plot, the action, the character, the setting, all,
It's a
all of
great
that
movie.
is in there.
Great movie.
It's a great movie, missing a few things.
Yeah,
But it's the story of stories. And really, as I mentioned before, the Exodus story itself is taken from Genesis 1 into the garden story. So then as we go through the Bible, you'll see that the prophets, Isaiah refers to elements of the Exodus all through the Psalms, like there's a lot of Psalms, I'm trying to think, is it 75 or 78, one of them that talks about the Exodus. And then when you get into the New Testament, just it's everywhere. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you see that
the whole
all
Gospels is an Exodus motif.
exactly.
Yeah,
So we really need to go back and really know the Exodus story, connect it to the Genesis story, and see what is going on here. And then the message is that God, through an act of creation or new creation, sets the captives free.
right,
Because the thing that they knew best in the ancient world, Israel in Egypt, Israel in Babylon, whomever, is slavery. That is the default position of humankind, is
right.
to be enslaved by, empire or whatever. And so this is the greatest story of deliverance from slavery, bar none. And then the New Testament just ups the game, right, to deliverance of slavery to sin and death. And everything is a component of that story.
So let me ask you this. So what people call the greater Exodus is not necessarily the concept of two houses being restored because he's coming to the restoration of the kingdom. But really what it is the release from death.
For all
for all
mankind.
mankind. That's why Paul says, "And in you all the nations of the earth will be blessed." So are we making it? Are we limiting the greater Exodus to only one type of people when in fact God is looking for all of creation to be restored?
I
Obviously, through
mean,
His covenantal people, we know that. But
bingo. He
yeah,
used the people to for this message to go out to all of the nations. But what is the thing that happened to Adam and Eve in the garden?
right.
Death. They could no longer
That
eat from the tree
right.
of life. They're exiled, which is a form of death. So the whole of the chaos language is all death language because the chaos figure would destroy, defeat, dehumanize, whatever you want to say. That was the role of the chaos figure, was to completely destroy. And then God, he comes in and he creates and he brings life. And so we have these two forces just colliding all the way through. And the Bible, of course, is the story of how life comes. But those people knew slavery. That's
Yeah.
kind of all they knew. It's
Well,
hard for us to engage that because we don't live like that.
that is so true. And Hebrews, we read it earlier. I like to read that verse for the audience in Hebrews chapter 2. Um, verse 14 and 15. The writer does a wonderful job explaining how the work of Yeshua, what he would do, that God would do through him. It says, therefore, since the children share in blood and flesh, he also is in like manner share in the same things, in order that through death, he, Messiah, uh, I'm sorry, that God, he could destroy the one who has the power over death, that is the devil, and can set free though these who through fear of death were subject to slavery throughout their lives. That's quite interesting because that's really the whole message of the Bible and the whole Exodus story. Even when they go out of Egypt, Dinah and Moses go to the Mount Sinai, and Israel willfully rebels against God, which they all should have died. And then Moses says, "Blot me out." He's expecting him to be cut off
Right.
for the people to be substitute one for the other, a ransom, this one for the other one. I mean, the whole narrative
The
about
whole
resurrection,
story.
about new creation is there.
How do we defeat death?
Right.
So you go back into the garden and you've got this character, Hasatan, serpent, or whatever,
Yeah.
adversary, who is a chaos figure. And then you go to Pharaoh, who is a chaos figure. And you go to King Nebuchadnezzar, who is a chaos figure. And then you have the Leviathan in the sea, who's a chaos figure. Because the only thing the chaos figure does is kill, steal, destroy, and bring death. And so the power of the devil is going to be that power of chaos to destroy
Right.
and kill.
And the
And
chaos is death.
yeah,
But so
exactly.
wait a minute. So that opens the question. I'm pretty sure someone is thinking about this in the audience. So really, the actions of Yeshua in his death and God resurrected him is not so that if you don't accept him, you go to hell. It's so that if you don't accept him, you sleep. You don't defeat death. That's what
Correct.
Isaiah 25:8. So the whole message has been completely changed. How
Exactly.
God, through the resurrection of Messiah, released us from death when in
Yes,
fact we
sure.
said, well, if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to go to hell, which is not really the whole point.
Exactly. And the whole story, Passover, death, burial, and resurrection is all within an ancient Near East context.
Correct.
So once we kind of understand that, then this type, it'll start making more sense. And then we can see the bigger thread of the story. Like that's just my heartbeat on this is like step back, folks. Let's not argue over little things
Right.
when the story is God's deliverance for all humanity. His heart is for all humanity. It's not like we for and no more, which is kind of what we've done in the Hebrew roots messianic world. And if you don't adhere to whatever the way we think of it and the way we've structured it, then adios. And this is not, it was never Yeshua's message. I mean, over and over again, where he kept going to across the sea in a boat or walking on water or whatever, where to the land of the Gentiles, right?
Right.
Across the Galilee to bring that message to them. And so there's this picture of him having dominion, having sovereignty over the chaos
Do, do you,
forces to deliver the Gentiles.
or even when He does the miracle of the demonic spirits leaving that guy and going into the pigs.
Yeah, that's
Well, people
that's
don't, it goes into the sea, which is chaos. But
yep,
what people don't realize is that the 10th Legion, the banner of the 10th Legion, one of the banners was
pig.
a pig, a
Yep.
boar.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's like there's a message behind that.
Absolutely. And so and then the message, the ancient message, because if you read the whole story and they go off the cliff and into the seas, was meant to be a picture of the Exodus and the deliverance from Pharaoh.
Right,
So the context of the story is taking them back to Egypt, the Exodus, the Pharaoh being drowned in the sea. And there was a goddess in Egypt, and I can't think of her name right now, who was like the doorway to the underworld. And she was
I
represented by a pig.
think,
I'm like,
yeah,
who?
I can't
You
remember
can't
right
make
now.
this stuff
I
up.
know.
And so now there they are in that same location. And like you said, they have the Roman legion there who is doing the same thing to the people, the Gentiles in that region, as what was being done to the Jews in
Right,
Exodus in Egypt.
right.
Whoa, can you
It's the
imagine?
same. It's all the same. It's about oppression, righteousness, and justice. And that's why the Bible says that, righteousness of God apart from the law doesn't mean that the Torah cannot keep you in the realm of life or give you what righteousness is. But this particular righteousness of God is a gift that the Torah cannot give you, but you're never going to grasp it unless you understand the motif, if you understand the metaphors, if you don't understand the narrative. I mean, I
But
see
the
it
Bible,
even resurrection, for example, Dina, in Genesis chapter, I think 2 or 3, I can't remember, when Adam is just mud, okay, dust, and God breathed on him the breath of life, and then he puts him into the garden. It's
yeah,
like, talk about resurrection motif right there. That's defeating death. He
yeah.
had no life, no purpose, no function until God
Well,
breathed
that
on him.
creational order is always about defeating death. And I think that the biblical
Repeat that,
writers
repeat that, repeat that, repeat that. Creation of the order.
creational order is about defeating death. So
Okay.
everything God is doing in the Bible is bringing creational order. So every time we hear a story, say in Genesis about the matriarchs and the patriarchs, and they totally mess up, but then that story is elevated in some way. That's creational order. For example, I read this in one of the extra biblical writings that talked about barren women were a symbol of the primal disorder or chaos in the world, and that when
Right.
they bore a child, that was an example of order coming to chaos and bringing forth a kingdom. A kingdom is born through that son. Like it doesn't matter what you're talking about in the Bible, it has a component of creational order. And to bring that order, you have to destroy chaos. Like there's no other way. I think that the writers chose predominantly the narrative of storytelling because it's easier to engage and people can listen to the stories and see these themes repeated over and over again. And not that the Bible doesn't use other genres, which we'll be talking about in future
Yeah.
weeks, but that one's the easiest. They were, you can just sit on a hillside and Yeshua's telling a story. You can just close your eyes and have a picture in your mind. And he's just, you're seeing all the world around you through that perspective, and it makes sense. And then you pass that story down to, your progeny, and they carry on the story. So here's the Bible just repeating the story
Yeah.
generation and generation and generation until, we hit the end, however that looks. But it's the defeat of chaos and the bringing in of creational order, which is the height of creational order is going to be resurrection. Like you don't
You
go
know,
past there.
to give you an example, a quick story. I went to Portugal after I left Turkey and Greece, spent a few days there. We had Shabbat there. We met this guy, my wife and I, we met this guy on the airport, on the plane on the way to Portugal. He's a Greek guy who lives in London, who lives in Portugal, grew up in London. And I pulled out my iPad and I began to read something about new creation and cosmology and stuff. He saw it by chance about an hour before we land. He goes, "Hey, I want to know about what you're reading because
Oh,
it's a
oh,
Greek
cool.
dude who's not really religious, but he's been seeking after God." And he goes, "And I come to the conclusion that the God of Israel is the one true God." He's been searching. So what's interesting is that was on Thursday. On Saturday, I invited him over to the hotel because we keep Shabbat. So from 3 o'clock, I said, "Show up around 3." And I began to show him some things. And because he's Greek, I said, "Hey, can I show you some stuff in Greek from Romans and I need your input because his father owned a 279-acre olive groves, the
Ooh,
olive.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
thinking, this is the perfect guy to tell me if I'm teaching Romans 11 correctly.
yeah,
When he read it, he goes, wow, the guy who wrote this knows what he was doing. My father does this. We do this all to this day. He says, do you know what the purpose of the grafted in? The grafted, when you graft it into a natural, which is against nature, exactly what Paul says. But the function was to allow it to bear more fruit, not to disregard the natural branches. And then he
exactly.
says, but when the wild branches are in their own tree, their fruit is inedible, and the wood is only good for burning. Then you graft a natural branch into the wild branch to make it stronger. And it's interesting. He goes, I only understand this because my father owned the farm, the olive, whatever. That's exactly what we're saying.
Yeah,
He understood it better because he
yes,
spoke Greek. He
yeah,
grew up in an environment that
yeah,
understood the procedures
yeah,
and the process. We are trying to read the narrative all the way removed from its environment, filtered through religion.
yeah.
And that's why we're so confused.
I've run into this several times with folks. I've some of my students, Chinese and Japanese, etc., from that culture. And when I talk to them, are like totally get it on board,
Yeah.
100%. And then you're trying to explain to Americans how this works. They just this is their world. They get it. It's almost seamless for them. And and that would be the same anyone in in the Middle East or whatever and Greek and I would love to go
So,
visit their olive groves. That's-
yeah, I know, right? Olive groves.
Oh, so when I in my Noah book, I wrote a whole section on vineyards. Because I mean, I've never had a vineyard. I don't know the first thing about it, other than the wine is good, right? So I went back. I found this a Harvard professor who had written her dissertation on viticulture. It was absolutely fascinating. I mean, I learned so much. I learned everything because I don't really know much about it. And then when I went back and began to read in the scriptures and the parables referring back to the vineyard and the tenants in the vineyard and all that sort of thing, and then thinking about Noah coming off the boat, he didn't just there had to be a vineyard somewhere for him to get wine. So and I mentioned before, the importance of understanding architecture and agriculture in the Bible, because those are the two most important things. Architecture in terms of temple, mountain, all that kind of stuff, and then agriculture if you want to understand the festival cycle and what goes on. And that's their world. Their world is agrarian, and not like us. We go to the fridge and get something to eat. So all these things, I guess we just keep beating a dead horse and we probably will continue, but you have simply got to learn the context. Well, you can't learn the context if you don't go back into the ancient world, because that is the context. And nobody's saying you got to live there and, immerse yourself in it and become, a Babylonian from 5,000 years ago. But, I don't know about you, but I think you're the same. We're all about trying to get people to understand what the scriptures is saying, and within that, as you engage in these stories, God will pour out his wisdom in you so that when you have life decisions to make and wise choices to make, you can fall back on these stories. How did God redeem this? How did he elevate that story? How did he raise these people up and took something that was, broken, disintegrating, decaying, and make it into something new?
Right.
The resurrection being the greatest, to take a dead body that is decaying and can't produce life and then give it new life.
I think the problem is that we're not tapping into time frame, time, space, and we're not really connecting the Bible with understanding how it works, like a vineyard. When you read the story that Noah came out and they built a vineyard and he got drunk, well, that didn't take
Yeah.
a month. I mean, that took a while,
Yes, because
you know.
vineyards, in the ancient world, it took 10 years before you produced a crop.
Right.
Hello. Yeah, so we read it. He came off the ark and grabbed, uh, you know, um, some Cabernet Sauvignon and had a drink. And then that was,
Well,
I mean, that's not logical.
it's not. It's just I was doing some research on the book of Ezra, trying to connect the exile returning. And when I'm connecting the book of Haggai, because Joe was teaching me about the language of the feast in the book of Haggai. You know, it
Hmm.
happened around Yom Teruah, and then I figured out,
Right.
wait a minute, between Ezra and Nehemiah, it's a whole bunch of years. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, between
Yeah.
Yeshua and
And
Zerubbabel, the priest, when they went
oh
back.
yeah.
Then you have
Yeah.
Ezra, it's another whole bunch of years. Then you have Nehemiah, a whole bunch of years.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole process took forever. And that's the one thing we don't quite understand. The narratives are not designed to tell you this happened in 30 years. No, it happened. It has to go through the process. I think if it will tell you how long it will take, we will get discouraged because
Yeah.
then we will know it will take too long.
Right. And
Uh,
yeah,
you,
I'm not willing to wait.
right? But the narrative is actually letting you know, no, no, no. God would always show up.
Yes,
He will
always.
follow through on what
Yeah,
he said, you know?
exactly. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many centuries or millennium,
Right.
the same God doing the same thing, bringing creational order to every situation that is challenging, difficult, broken, whatever. I remember when I was doing a study on Esther, and I hadn't really as a Jew, we read it every year, we celebrated Purim, we got all dressed up, we did all this stuff. But it had never occurred to me to look at it historically with the time frame.
Yeah, Passover.
And what I was saying is I didn't even think that when Esther, the story takes place, the temple is standing in Jerusalem because
That
it
oh,
was
that's true. That's
it
true. I didn't think about
is
that.
King Darius, and he
That's right.
finishes maybe somewhere around 715. I mean, excuse
Right.
me, 515, 516. Like it took 7 years or whatever. So there's a standing temple there in Persia. It's Circe's period, so what we're in like 450
Somewhere
somewhere.
around there.
We're like what, 70 or whatever that 70 years later after a temple has been built and is operational in Jerusalem. And then we have this whole story of Esther, and you're like, well, how come they just didn't, why didn't they go back to they got a temple? Because
Well,
the temple was
that's
their
the whole story,
identity.
by the that's the whole story, by the way. How it had the 10 spies repeat itself all over again.
Yeah.
They refused to go to the promised land.
Yeah, exactly.
And
The
there's
place
always
where life would come forth, creational order, but they didn't want to go because it was hard.
right,
It wasn't comfortable. It meant work. It meant starting over. Nobody wants to do that.
especially after they prosper so much in Babylon and Persia.
Exactly. I mean, life was good. But, and again, and on the theme of death, like exile was equal to death.
That's true.
So when they went down to Egypt, before the Exodus, and then they were fruitful and multiplied as we got, as we have in the Genesis story, and then then they became a threat. And now, Pharaoh implements chaos because slavery is essentially chaos.
Right.
And
But
they're in
again, but
exile in chaos, and yet look how God restores creational order to that entire event.
when I was doing an interview with Professor Mark Chavalis, we were talking about the exiles, and he brought some evidence from Assyria, that area, in which the Assyrians we know they took a lot of the elite of the 10 tribes. We
Mhm.
do know that.
Yes.
The thing is that the 10 tribes didn't want to come back. They actually joined their army, and you know that general that came over and to Judah who spoke Hebrew
Yeah,
in the
but I
Bible.
forget.
Actually, he was
Yeah.
one of the Israelites.
Yeah. With
That's
the
crazy.
yeah.
That makes sense because
Yeah.
there were enmity the whole time,
Yeah.
during the time. I mean, the whole story is the same. And I would love for people to consider that when we teach about this stuff, I'm not disregarding the validity of the event.
Right.
What we're saying is, what's the message behind the message?
Yeah.
We are so focused about, no, it's got to be a square block on a round peg or whatever hold, and we try to force it in, and then we justify change and create new theologies to basically, bring peace to our own understanding. But when you go back to the original context, you go, oh, it fits perfectly. Follow it all the way through. Do you think that if we learn about the literary genres and how the narrative and the narration works, then we'll see that thread all throughout and we're not going to have a problem understanding better?
I wish I could say that. I would encourage people to do that, but we live in a time, I mean, people are very divided in their opinions, and they're very set in on their opinions, and if somebody doesn't agree with them exactly, they see them as the enemy. So, this is problematic. So even if you were to go back and you were to look approach the scriptures from this way, it takes a very mature person to be able to recognize the value of this type of the literary writing of the scriptures, and to be able to take a step back and say, this isn't going to divide me from someone else. I have a different opinion about this. I'm not getting into a theological, argument over it. But that's a tall order. I
Yeah.
feel like we'd be salmon swimming upstream on this one, but I won't stop encouraging people to view the Bible through this lens. And for me, what's happened for me is it has helped me to just chill. So all the
Yeah.
stuff that I took so seriously and was just entrenched in, this is my hill to die on, I now could care less. I have my faith. I do my thing. Our family does, and I'm not going to impose it on anyone else. But I just don't feel the same intensity about all that anymore. And then, as I've understood how important the human condition is to God, and if I can see people as just human beings, that are held captive by sin and addiction and chaos, and understand how God will deliver them, then maybe I can take them that message and not worry about whether they're lighting the candles at the exact same time, or is it the morrow after the Sabbath when we get to counting the Om? Like, I'm just not going there. I have my walk, that's my walk, but it's my walk.
Mark uses this expression a lot with me, and I like to use it with you. I want to push back a little bit on that because I understand where you're coming from based on our frustration as teachers dealing with all these topics and give them all the information and trying to give them the evidence and trying to give them the resource, trying to give them all the research. And it's like, nope, I don't believe like you because it sounds different. It's too hard to study. They don't want to get it. So it creates in us, and I'm trying to watch myself from becoming like that because it's only logical. We become like, whatever, I know what I'm doing. You guys do what you guys got to do. I'm not wasting anymore. But I had this
Well, that's
experience.
that's going to the extreme on it.
Right, I got you.
I'm not, yeah,
And we're
not
not there yet. We're
encouraging
not there
that.
yet.
Yeah.
We're not there. Hopefully, we never get there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went to this particular church. I got invited to a church, and I get invited to churches very often. And this is a mainstream nominal Christian church. Pastor, wow, what a great guy. Really nice guy. His son recommended me, and I got invited last year. They liked the topic. And I had to do two services. But last year, I didn't have a chance to spend a lot of time with the pastor. This time, he actually went out of his way to make sure he opened a window of time that we can talk. And, you know, this is a great thing. And I told him, I said, it's encouraging for me right now to have the conversation with you that although we're not doing some of the same things, we can actually dialogue about the Bible and edify one another without focusing on all the arguments. And I say thank you because you give me the opportunity to share my heart, and I'm not trying to impose what I believe in you on you, because I know that if we search this, eventually we all come back down to the same root. And I think that's the one thing I'm learning, and I think that's what you're trying to say,
Yeah.
that we're trying to guide them to a particular place, and then we all will walk in unison. But until we learn the message,
Yeah.
then we're not going to understand the importance of everything else.
Well, it's
And
always a heart issue. I mean, it always comes
yeah,
down to the heart. And we don't want to have a hard heart, and we don't want to just dismiss people out of hand. And we have to be willing, to kind of go the extra mile, if you will. Um,
well, it's difficult because we try
it's
so hard.
difficult.
Look, I know what you teach. I've known you for a long time. I think it's like 20 years now, I think,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh,
and you're still a
we're
friend. Oh, my
showing our
Lord,
age.
you know? So, and I know what you study. And I can't say that I always agreed with you. But what's interesting is I did not agree with you back then, not because it was necessarily not true. It's because I was not ready to look into those areas of study yet. And then when I began to complement other areas and I began to look at the wider perspective, I'm thinking, wait a second. And then I start recalling all the people told me, and you came up, and then Joe comes up, and I'm thinking, okay, that taught me a big lesson. Be quick to hear and slow to reject. because it happens to us now. We present as teaching, and then we have, and this is what I got to be honest with you. This is what really gets me under the skin when people argue about a point they've never studied. And I think, I mean, we're trying to study all the time to help you, not to convince you, to help you and share. And then you're going to have an argument with me about something you never really looked into because if feather ruffle your feathers, that's not really fair to us. That all we're doing is do the research so you can validate it. And that's what I did with a lot of stuff you talked about. That's why you're on, because I'm thinking maybe I'm looking at it at that point. I'm not considering those things. But now that I have a little more experience, I'm thinking I understand now what you're trying to say. And
Amen,
sometimes
brother. Better late than never.
better late, but it's not like I didn't understood. It's just
Yeah.
that, you know,
No,
I'm
it's just a different way of looking at it, and it's hard because we don't live in that world and we are programmed and we've been propagandized for our whole life into seeing through a certain lens. And then you step back and then you start seeing things differently. And then as a teacher, you have a platform and then you begin to share it and people are like, "Whoa, baby, I'm not going there. That's just over the top." And I've learned, the message from the Lord has just been wait. In time, they will see.
but
So I have my class now. I mean, they're like getting it. Usually it takes 4 weeks. And then the students start, okay, I think I'm having trouble with some of this, but I'm starting to get it. These guys were like right there on the
yeah.
first week. I'm going, I think we're making headway, even though I don't see these people, but what we've been doing all these years, the foundation that we have laid is really starting to take root.
Well,
And the sprouts are coming up and
what
they're in different stages of growth, but I think, I think it's time.
I think what's interesting, Dina, is that to every single person in the biblical narrative, what people think we're going too deep, it was common knowledge to them.
Right.
And that's scary because you think about David, he lived in the old days. There were no cell phones, no computers, there was no cameras, there was nothing. Those guys are just living like in the caveman and whatever. But if they were reading the Torah and the prophets, they could sit there and understand it better than we do. And we have all the commentaries, we have all the softwares, we have all the resources. And they would have said, no, that's not what it means. Well, how
Well,
do you know? Well, I was there.
well, that's like I was saying earlier. All of my Asian students instinctively understand it, because there's not a whole lot of daylight between the Asian culture and the ancient Middle East culture.
Especially honor and shame. It's very
Yeah,
huge. And
exactly.
yeah.
So, they have an advantage that we don't. I try to, capitalize with, but when they're talking, they're like, they get it, mano a mano, like, yeah, that makes, I'm not having any trouble with this.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. So let's say you have a person who wants to learn this, and they're a little skeptical, and they're still trying to figure out their faith. Clearly, I know people who've been following the Bible for 20 years that they don't know the Bible. They've been a Christian, but they never really read it. So you have this person for a few minutes, and you tell them, start here, start here, start there. What would I mean? We have to also narrow it down for some people too.
Yeah.
How will you start?
I actually would encourage them to read the Exodus story.
And then from there, connect the same motif
Yeah.
all the way through.
I think when that's a story you can read, it's easy, relatively easy to understand, although when you get to Exodus 25, you're a little challenged. But
That's my
that's,
favorite chapter. What's wrong
I
with
know,
you?
that's where you can see human nature in action. You can see, we've been talking about slavery, but you can see how, what it would have been like to be in that situation. And then you can see how great this God is who delivered these people and what he did. And, and then they still screwed up and, made a golden calf in the wilderness. Like, I think it's one of the best examples of human nature. Uh,
So,
and
so
then how
basically,
God
you're
held.
saying, so basically, you're saying that the Book of Revelation can only be understood if you understand the Exodus story.
Oh, absolutely. I don't even think you can, yes, we read it and we make all our assumptions about it, but honestly, there is so much Exodus language in
Crazy, right?
Revelation. It's crazy. It's like
Yeah.
crazy.
Israel goes through the water. There's a woman who goes through the water.
Uh,
Israel's scared. They are oppressed. The seven churches are scattered abroad in shame. I mean, the parallels are so incredibly
yeah,
connected. It's
because
amazing.
the Exodus is the story.
Right.
I think even that story will help you understand Genesis better.
Oh,
Not
I
that,
would agree with that.
you know what I mean? So today, if someone came to me, I would encourage them to read that first. And then maybe we can talk John 6 and manna in the wilderness and,
Right. Start
some of the
connecting all the
references that
dots.
Yeshua made, his
Transfiguration.
immersion.
The
What's that?
transfiguration.
Yeah,
The
on the
transfiguration.
mountain, the
The
cosmic
mountain.
mountain related to Exodus 24 with Moses on the mountain in the cloud, and then we got in Luke, Elijah, and Moses there. Like all of that, it's really hard to talk about that stuff in a vacuum. And then especially for folks like in the Christian church who have sort of dismissed the Old Testament and whatever, why ever, however, they have no frame of reference. They
But you
have
know what I
nothing
found? But you know
to
what I found with them
explain it.
though? What I found with them is that once they see the motifs,
Oh,
they really get excited
game changer.
because they're thinking more like a spiritual application.
Yes.
So what I found when I teach on a church in a church, what I try to do is I'm trying to encourage them to look at these stories in the narrative. And by the
Yes.
way, you see that story, you can connect it over here. And when they
Yeah.
see the connection, they get all excited. And to them, it's like, wow, I never saw that before. And I think that if we do not understand the way it works, for example, we talk about the weddings of the Lamb, right? We talk about the Last Supper, not the Last Supper that we call with Yeshua. Talk about the Supper of the Lamb. Well, when you study the ancient Near East, you know when the king is enthroned, he wins a big battle. They sing a song of victory, and then they have a feast. Oh my Lord,
Gee, that sounds like
that's
Exodus.
right. Exactly like the Exodus, exactly like the whole
You
gospel, and
just stole
exactly
my
the Book of
book.
Revelation.
It's in my next chapter, chapter
Oh, it is. Every time I tell you something, it's
I
always in one of
know.
your
I put it
chapters.
in my
So,
book. Well, this again is the power of narrative, the power of storytelling. It's so much easier to engage. If we could keep it kind of in that realm, maybe we don't have to argue over theological points of theology or whatever.
do you think that maybe, and you know, this is one of my favorite topic. Do you think that the lack of understanding of the temple is really the reason why we are so disconnected? Because the temple is Eden. The
Yeah.
temple is a
Right.
garden.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So if we're going to go back to where death does not exist, or the exile from where, you have to have a point of departure.
Right, right, exactly. Well, and then really the temple of temples is going to be the cosmic temple in Genesis chapter 1 that God
Right.
creates for a place for his presence and
Well,
take,
isn't that why the book of Revelation ends and doesn't talk about a temple?
yeah, well, because
Because of
it's
that.
all one big, giant temple filled with humanity,
Right.
right? And again, that's the message is it's for everyone. And so we have to learn how to share that message. You know, I I attended church for quite a few years, even I was a believer. I mean, I made the transition from, I don't know, I guess it wasn't really a transition, but understanding my faith in a different way. And so I don't know, it's really challenging to try to help people see this. Again, I get stuck on the fact that people refuse to even, well, in the Christian world, refuse to even read the stories in the Tanakh. That it's like, okay, Micah, Malachi, we're done. And now we have 400 years in between, who cares? And then Matthew 1:1, we've got Yeshua. And that's where
But
we start, and that's where, but yet, I mean, I was even in the work I'm doing with the Exodus story, starting in Matthew 1:1, and while reading the first chapter of Matthew, I was I've always been kind of enamored by the fact that there's these five women, right, that are in the genealogy to bring forth the Messiah in this environment that we're going to have Herod, right, killing all the baby boys. And then we go back to Moses' story, Exodus, the first few chapters, there's another five women.
right.
So in my mind, I'm like, I don't think this is an accident. So the
There is a
story's
connection.
yeah, there's a story being told. Once again, Matthew really tells the story kind of
Well,
in a different way.
especially when you know the way women were treated in the ancient Near
Oh,
East, in the ancient
yeah.
world.
And yet we always have around Moses's birth, around Yeshua's birth, around his resurrection around his, all of these major points in the lives of these men are these women.
Right.
Miriam, the victory song at the sea, Zipporah. I mean, it's just, again, the themes, the connections, they're everywhere. But I think foundationally, if we can really understand the Exodus story, a lot of this will come through. I mean, the prophets are speaking endlessly about the exile, and they associate it with death and loss of identity and
Right.
everything that goes
Oh,
with
that's
it.
about a shame. Do you think the problem, this connection, is because we were taught within what they call Hebrew roots? Um, I'm not really associated, although I minister to a lot of them. But the reason why I rather just call myself disciple of the way is because I got tired of all the crazy arguments, and they're not willing to hear each other,
Yeah.
and that's my biggest issue, my point of contention. There's a lot of great people on every side, okay? But there's no communication. People argue about stuff all the time without really going through the process.
Well,
We were taught
people
that
don't listen.
I know,
They don't listen. Yeah.
they were taught for so long by people who are, anyway,
Well,
let me
so
not
you
go
think
there.
about the rabbis, I mean, right? They would go in and man, it looked like they hated one another, yelling and screaming and
And they're doing fine.
and they come out, and they
Right.
just love each other and like they know how to argue. Jews know how to argue.
Yeah,
Still like
but
each other
remember,
after they're done.
we were taught that such greater exodus. Oh, this greater exodus will come out of this, will come out of that. And now I'm studying, I'm going like, the greater exodus is God defeating death.
So that's why I call my book The Greatest Exodus.
Oh, no, oh,
That's
that's what it is.
that's what that'll be in the last chapter, and I've just given you all the punchline of the whole
There you
book.
go. Well,
But
so wait a second. Let's keep going on that line right here. So the greatest exodus
yeah,
is actually the final message, which is always the original message that God has victory over death.
yeah,
Okay, by the
that's
way,
it.
I have a teaching called Death Defeated, right? And you probably didn't listen to it.
I'm
I hope you
sorry.
should. That's okay. But I think we have been gone in the left field with a term that when you take the time to really go through the narrative, you're going to see that it's a simple message.
It's a
The
simple
greater
message.
exodus or the greatest exodus is actually God giving us freedom from our slavery. We are slave in this world through death,
Yep,
you know?
exactly. It's the greatest deliverance from slavery, bar none, in the course of all of human history.
So it could happen. You living in every country in the world, you don't have to go to a particular place to be delivered.
Right. Yeah. And
I'm telling
again,
you,
it's for all humanity. So the
for all of
Exodus
it.
was for the Hebrew people who were in Egypt, who were in exile. They were was for a specific time, for a specific place, people, all of that. But the message, the greater message is that Israel was to take it to all the nations.
Right.
So that all, I mean, that's kind of the message at Mount Sinai, right? That's what it was supposed to be. And so, I mean, I don't want people to forget that. And I'm afraid in the Hebrew roots messianic world, we have forgotten
That
the
is true.
value of every human, that
I
God
think, yeah.
cares for every human being. And we have the message of the power of the deliverance from death. Why on earth are we not sharing it from the hilltops?
I think because it's been so diluted by the message of religion
Right.
and denominationalism, and I belong to this part, or like Paul was saying, are you Apollos or are you Paul's? Are you this? We forgot that the message is about resurrection. It's about how God has given us freedom from something that no one can attain freedom from. And until we learn to really see the narrative and understand the motifs, we're going to be easily deceived into believing stuff based on people's interpretations. And as a teacher, I'm sure you're much aware of that, as I am too.
Yeah.
That we want to just teach and get out of the way and let God work in you.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and people have a real need for community and identity. I mean, these are the things, these are the pieces, this is glue that holds a community together. So we understand the need for identity, and with identity, you have cultural sort of you agree on sort of cultural norms and language and history and all that stuff. So we understand that. So what's unique about the Bible story is it doesn't matter what culture, it doesn't matter, what tradition, it doesn't matter what language, it doesn't matter what skin color, it doesn't matter none of that matters because
Salvation is, yeah, it's given to all who believe.
the temple that is the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven is filled with all those who have
But
made a covenant with Yahweh.
and I don't know how you feel about this. We haven't really talked about it, but the purpose of God selecting the 12 tribes is to be the beacon of light to the nations.
Right.
That through that through that covenant with the Torah and through the Messiah, we can come into the, like you were talking about, that, Jerusalem coming from the heavens after millennial reign. I believe it's after the millennial reign, but anyway. So my point is that if you look at the whole structure of both religions, let's talk about Judaism. For all its good, it has certain things I don't agree with. And in Christianity, the same thing. So we're not really attacking, observing two different things. But in Judaism today, by and large, they don't really care if the Torah is going to the nations or not.
Right.
So they
Right.
say, no, it's ours. It's my tree. I'll eat of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of the spectrum here, we have the Christians denominations who cut the tree all completely out.
Yeah.
And they don't want that identity and the inheritance.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's about identity and inheritance. But who is the ones who's going to lead the way? It has to be through God's master plan of
Right.
his people. And I think that's what disconnect occurs. They want to do their own way, changing their own feasts, doing their own. Wait a minute, that already happened in the Bible. It didn't go very well for Ephraim.
Right. Yeah,
So
right. Well, and I think, so obviously we have the 12 tribes at Mount Sinai, and then in the New Testament we have the 12 disciples, well, minus one, plus one. But at the end of Matthew, we see Yeshua on a mountain in the Galilee handing off for them to go out in his name and
70
reproduce,
nations.
yeah, reproduce after like kind. So the disciples kind of pick up from the 12 tribes, the leaders of the 12 tribes, they pick up that role, and all authority and power is given to them now to pass off, the kingdom to whosoever will. And it's a greater message. It's the greatest
But do
message.
you think people may misunderstand that by thinking that now the 12 tribes are not in play? Or are you saying that the
One
parallel, the
doesn't
message,
replace the other. Yeah.
I
They're
got you,
tracking together. That's why
it's
we're
the message.
saying, yeah, it's the message. It's not, I'm not putting it in a box. I mean, the whole gospel of Matthew fits, not the whole thing, but fits nicely into the Exodus.
You're
It's
talking
just
about the
taken the
parallels then.
story and elevated it.
So it's the parallels.
Yeah. Yeah.
See,
It's
this
not
is
one
this
or
is the
the
thing though.
other.
This is the thing though, that's exactly the point, that we have a problem with people. They listen to this stuff and they go, no, oh, wait a minute, is it this one, not this one anymore? And the whole arguments come in. No, it's just so happened that the Spirit of God hovers on the waters of the earth. Yeshua walks on water. And Moses goes to the mountain and he comes down with a face like light. And Yeshua goes up on the mountain and he's transfigured. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a
Yeah.
parallels. It's
Yeah.
one or
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah, it's the story. It's the story, going back to the Exodus being the story of stories. And it
So
just
how do
keeps
we manage
repeating.
that though? So how do we as teachers manage? We understand it.
Right.
When we say it, we get it. But sometimes the way we say it maybe does not convey for the audience because they're not used to the information. That's the
Sure.
problem.
I think as long as we are showing them the connections, I
Yeah,
mean, that's all we can do is show them this is not in a vacuum. This isn't some separate thing, and that it is a seamless story from beginning to end. And I'm going to show you how these things all work together. And as you were saying, that they're parallel stories over and over and over again, not one story replaces the other story, replaces another story. Nothing is
right.
getting replaced here. We're just
Yeah,
adding on, and we're tweaking it and giving it a twist that it didn't have. Like look at the story and go, gosh, look what God did in this story that's a little different than what he did back here. What is the difference? What is
right.
the message, the higher message in this story that I didn't see in the other story?
That
Again,
that
you
that
s-
happened. I'm
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. That happens a lot in the book of Deuteronomy.
Sure.
And then when people say, no, the Bible's contradicting us, I say, wait a second, no. In the book of Deuteronomy, they're going into the land 40 years later. They're going into a different geographical location. So you have to make adjustments. It's an amendment. I mean, so the story's the same. You're
Yeah.
applying the commandment in a different geographical location. So clearly you have to adapt certain things, not
Well, yeah.
disregarding the
You
original
are
one.
you are flesh. You live in the world. The location is real. There is dirt, desert, trees,
Yeah,
mountains. You don't just go pretend it's something else. And so the writers use what they have in the world in which they're in, the environment, whether they're in the city or they're out by the river or whatever. They're using what's around them, just like Yeshua in the parables. He used everything that was familiar to them. Even the parables were somewhat familiar until he put this twist on the end that they were not expecting. And so,
right.
how he elevates the kingdom of heaven using stories.
But do you think that, and my last question, I know I really, I really enjoy speaking with you about this stuff because there are times that I'm sitting here and I see something, right? But then to be honest with you, it's difficult to find people that I can freely say, hey, let's look at this and let's study it out. Let's see if you see what I see. And if they're not really researching the same areas, and one of the things that I teach my students is don't study with me, agree with me because it's me. I mean, I want to make sure that I'm not seeing crazy stuff. I want to be accountable.
Right, right. Yeah,
And it's kind of nice to talk to people like you and Professor Chavalas and some of the other people I'm talking to, that we study certain areas and we can compare notes. And it's not a tug of war about who's right or wrong. We're just trying to understand one another.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think if we all take the same approach, because you've been doing this, what, 40 years?
yeah. I think it's more than 40 now.
Joe has been doing it like 44. I've
Yeah,
been at it for 26 now. And
yeah,
I've been spending, I mean, I've been at it for 26, but the last 19 years, I've studied 6, 7 hours a day. So compute that in years.
yeah, yeah.
And I still feel like I don't know anything.
Well, and
And
that's how I feel writing
yeah,
this
isn't it
book.
great?
I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't really know anything.
Well, you know what happened to me recently? I got an opportunity to, one of my dreams was in martial arts. You know, I've been doing martial arts for a long time.
Yeah.
That after my hip replacement, I began to do jujitsu, right? And I saw a niche because I have background information in all the areas, master in 3 different martial arts systems. So I'm thinking,
My
man,
grandkids all do jujitsu.
I know. So when I began to do jujitsu, I'm thinking, just like I do in my studies, if I have a weapon, I could do this, 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 and this. But then one common denominator came into play. I was trying to apply what I knew in a new environment that I had no fundamentals in.
Mm,
Although I knew what to do in my world, if I did not know their fundamentals, I'm not going to be able to counter them.
right.
So I needed to step back and thinking, am I this terrible? Or it's just that I'm not emptying my cup for a while to learn the fundamentals here in order to understand the movement so I then can counter. Well, we do the same thing in the Bible study.
Yeah.
We are not willing to empty our cups to
Yeah.
learn these things that allow us to connect it with everything else we're researching.
Yeah. Well, that's all related to appreciating and gratitude. And, these are character qualities that have been kind of neglected, to appreciate what a teacher has done over the course of their life. And of course, a teacher must be accountable and stand the test of time. But
That's
and I
true.
think when we've been in it, 40, 50, 30 years, uh, I think that's something you can take to the bank, kind of. Um, and to have gratitude for those that came before us and the work that they've done. There's just Sometimes there's just not a lot of that. And, everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame on the
That's
internet.
true.
My goodness. And without the credentials, I'm not necessarily credentials, but you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
Without the accountability,
Yeah.
without the community holding you to account.
Well, that doesn't exist anymore.
No,
It
no.
doesn't exist. Anybody can come out, start a channel, a
Yep,
YouTube channel, say some crazy stuff, and they
yep,
have followers, and then that's
yep,
it. I
yeah.
mean, that would never happen in my world, in the areas that I dwell in and that I practice in martial arts. If somebody will do crazy things like that,
Oh,
they'll call
yeah,
them out,
yeah, they're
you
gone.
know, because
We
people are more,
allow, we
we
allow
allow it.
crazy. Yeah,
We are not willing to step up and say, That's over the line. Let's look what the Bible says and be accountable. And you know that 90% of the stuff going on in the Hebrew roots today, if there was a Sanhedrin council in Jerusalem, they'll be called out. People don't realize the legality of the Bible gives the judicial body to holy things in the Bible, and that's another conversation.
Oh
But
yeah.
there's no accountability. People
Yeah.
can do some crazy prophecies, nothing ever happened, and no, and it's bad to say, "Hey, how come you're still teaching? You fall under the category of false prophet."
But
And
everything's that way. The
it's
entire
sad.
culture, the government,
That's true.
you name it, pick it. We live in a world in which we have thrown accountability to the wind, and when that happens, there is no justice.
That's right. And when there's no justice, there's tribulation, exile.
And there's every man doing whatever he wants in
That's
his
right.
own eyes. So that's kind of where we've arrived. So we have to be that beacon of light, and
We're
just do
doing
the
it.
best, yeah, do the best that we can with what I mean, we have the opportunities now to get the message out much farther and wider than even, Paul could imagine running around the Roman Empire,
But you
right?
know what's great about this, though, that now, although there are challenges, there are people out there who are willing to put the time, the effort, and the spend the hours educating and sharing what they know freely. It's like
Yeah,
here it is. So I'm very, very excited about the possibilities in the future that God will raise up all the teachers that will be willing to put in the time, like you, like Joe, like myself, and some other teachers that are out there teaching and sharing what they know. I mean, so I'm really excited about that.
yeah, yeah. Well, so I hope, people have a better grasp on the whole genre of narrative because it's really a big genre in the Bible and a very important one. And then we next time we're gonna when we meet again, we'll be talking about poetry and the wisdom literature because I know that's an area of sort of confusion and I'm not the greatest. I've said this probably 10 times now in the poetry department, but
Are we going to have Matt come in?
yeah, I've already confirmed with Matt, and so the three of us will talk about that. And he's got a special skill set in that, so I think that'll be some really good information for
That's going to
everybody.
be kind of cool because when Matt comes in, I'll be like not saying anything because he's really good at that stuff.
Oh yeah, Matt could talk for a whole hour and
That's
just,
great.
he
Dina, thank you
doesn't
so
need
much.
us.
So what?
He doesn't need us, but
Well, you know
he's
what?
a good. So what we're trying to show you here is he's a great resource. Why am I going to ignore it? Like we're
Well,
going
that's
to
the whole
tap
point.
into the people who can provide the resource to you and help you understand better.
Well, that's the whole idea. I mean, one of the things that but you know what the common denominator of everyone who studies is that when they don't know something, they admit it and they look for the guy who's an expert in those
Yeah.
areas to share with you. That's
Yeah.
how I know if the person is really in the educational platforms. And they say, you know what? That's not my area, but I know somebody who can help you with it.
Exactly.
And when you
Yeah.
have people like Shavala say, hey, by the way, that's not what I do, but let me recommend to you this books. And then Roy Gain, I asked him a question. He was a student of Milgram. And I asked him a question. He goes, have you read this work of this other, scholar? I'm thinking, wow, he's not afraid that I'm going to learn from that other guy. And I'm not going to be his number one. I mean, there's no competition. It's about information.
And that's, with a team of teachers, that are working together to bring the message, there's no competition.
That's exactly it. Love you, Dina. Thank you so much for joining me.
Love you, my
Appreciate it.
brother. Thanks for having me, and we will see you in a couple of weeks, I guess.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's got to be before I go to Israel. I leave
Well,
on the
just
8th.
give me a date.
We'll definitely do. And guys, thank you for joining me. I do pray that this exchange and these conversations will help you understand more our approach and the way we are, trying to share the Bible with you. By no way or means we think that we're perfect in everything. Well, maybe Dean, I don't know. But we are all learning and searching and trying to find out, and we want to share it with you. Your job is to validate, to go in and put it to the test, look it up. I'm willing to change my positions if I'm corrected biblically, and if it lines up with the Bible, I don't have a problem changing. What I do, however, I would appreciate if you have an argument, make sure you do it biblically. Show the evidence, present it in a manner that we can say, "Hey, I never thought about that," and then we'll adapt to that. I had to learn to do that in many things throughout my last 20 years, and I hope that you do too. But these teachings and conversations are designed to give you a more in-depth look into our approaches to study and some of the conclusions we'll come to. and specifically understanding the literary genres that I got to be honest with you, I wasn't really that much interested into it until like 5 years ago. And I'm myself still learning and grabbing the importance of it as I study. So I hope this is interesting to you. Thank you, Dina. Where can they find you and what website can you recommend them to go to?
Foundationsandtorah.com is my webpage, and
Say that a little bit more excitement so they can really see it. Come on now with a big old smile. Well, you have a course, right?
yes, I was going to get to that.
Go for it.
Foundationsandtorah.com is my website. And then my course, the Temple Revealed course, you can purchase the 3 books and the course online at Amazon. That's easy. Just go to Dinah Dye. And if you have an interest in taking the course, it's 12 weeks. We're halfway through the current one. I won't be doing another one till the fall because I don't like to do it in the summer. But just send me an email. And all you have to do, dinadye@protonmail.com. It's very easy. And just let me know that you're interested in taking a future course.
Ah, that sounds good. Now it's my turn. If you want to know more about what I teach, go to wisdomandtorah.com. I taught Dina everything she knows. I'm just playing. And this is the course that we're going to have next week. It'll be on the website, hopefully by late summer. Hopefully. But we already have 101 through 107. And anyway, so I think you will have a good time learning a little bit more about the
I should
temple.
mention my latest book.
Yeah, go ahead and mention your book.
Okay, so it's called The Greatest Exodus.
The
So now that
Greatest.
you got a good foundation here with the storytelling, but The Greatest Exodus. And I'm hoping it'll be out before Sukkot.
Well, when it comes out, let's do a program so you can talk about it.
Absolutely. I'll be sending you many copies. No.
Sounds good. If we get them in Spanish, we can promote them to you in
Yes.
Spanish too.
Yes. Thank you. All
All
right.
right, guys. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. God
Take
bless
care.
you. Please help
Bye.
us promote this everywhere and also subscribe to Dina's and my page. Keep us supporting us so we can continue.